Have you ever sat in the quiet aftermath of a tragedy? When the noise has faded, when the phone stops ringing, when the room feels too empty, and wondered, with a question that burns hotter than grief itself, why bad things happen to good people? Why the kind-hearted are crushed, while the ruthless seem to rise? Why the honest lose, the faithful weep, and the wicked, so often, appear to prosper as if the world itself has been built to reward the wrong hands. And if you have ever asked that, you are not weak, you are human. Because there are moments when suffering does not feel like a lesson. It feels like an injustice written into the fabric of life, like a storm that chooses its victims without reason, like a knife that falls in the dark and finds the ones who least deserved it.
In those moments, the hardest pain is not always what happens to us. It is what happens inside us. The slow, frightening sensation that heaven has gone silent, that prayers rise like smoke and vanish into an empty sky, that God, who once felt so near, now feels impossibly far away. Why does God allow it? Why does He not stop it? Why does it sometimes seem that the louder we cry, the quieter heaven becomes? This is not a modern question born from social media and headlines. It is ancient. It is older than empires, older than philosophies, older than the songs sung around graves. It is the question whispered by mothers in the night, by fathers staring at hospital walls, by the faithful who have done everything right and still find themselves drowning in pain they cannot explain. And the Bible, far from ignoring this, steps directly into it, like a torch carried into a cavern, revealing that the struggle between faith and suffering, between justice and silence, has always been part of the human story. Because Scripture does not pretend life is simple. It does not offer a shallow answer wrapped in pretty words. It offers something heavier, something truer. It offers a journey, a descent into questions that feel too dangerous to speak aloud, and an ascent into a kind of faith that does not depend on comfort to survive. Within its pages, we find not only commandments and promises, but a confrontation with the deepest paradox of the spiritual life. That God can be perfectly righteous, and yet His ways can feel incomprehensible to the human mind. And if you want to understand that paradox, if you want to stare into the mystery of suffering without losing your soul, then there is one story in the Bible that stands like a mountain in the middle of the storm. A story so severe, it feels almost unbearable. A story so sacred, it has shaped how generations understand endurance, justice, and the silence of God. In an arid land long ago, there lived a man whose life would become the greatest test of faith ever told. His name was Job. In the arid land of Uz, where the wind could carve its own sermons into the sand, and where life itself felt fragile beneath the heat, there lived a man whose name would one day become a landmark in the spiritual imagination of the world. His story did not begin in a palace, and it did not rise from a prophet's mantle. He was not crowned. He was not celebrated by nations. He was not carried forward by politics or warfare. He was simply a man. But he was a rare man. His name was Job, and Scripture describes him with words that do not sparkle with human fame, but with something far more weighty: moral gravity. Job was blameless and upright, a man who feared God with a reverence so deep it shaped the direction of his life, the way rivers shape valleys. And he shunned evil, not as a performance for other people, but as an inner discipline of the soul. In a world where righteousness is often tangled with hidden motives, Job's integrity stood out like a clean flame in a smoke-filled room. He did not merely believe in God. He ordered his steps around God, as if every day was a quiet act of worship. And yet, Job was not only a man of faith, he was also a man of abundance. The blessing upon his life was visible, measurable, undeniable, so immense that the world around him could not ignore it. His lands were wide, His herds were countless. Hundreds of cattle moved like living wealth across his fields, and servants filled his household like an army of hands, carrying out every task with practiced devotion. His name carried weight in the region, because his prosperity was not modest, it was legendary. Scripture calls him the greatest of all the people of the East, a man so prosperous that comparison itself began to feel pointless, as though God's favor had settled over his life like a covering. But even that was not his greatest treasure, because Job's true wealth did not graze in his fields or sit in his storerooms. It laughed at his table. He had 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and they lived in joy, not as strangers scattered by rivalry, but as a family bound together by celebration. They gathered in one another's homes for feasts, sharing bread and wine, filling the air with music and conversation, moving through life as though the world was safe and God's goodness was steady. Their laughter echoed through the house like sunlight through open windows, and it seemed, from the outside, like Job's life had been built on unshakable foundations: righteousness, blessing, and a family that felt like a living crown. This was the picture. A good man in a good season, a faithful soul surrounded by visible favor, a life that looked, to anyone watching, like proof that the world still made sense. And that is exactly why what came next would strike so deeply, because the greatest tests do not always come to the wicked. Sometimes they come to the most upright man on earth. Yet beneath the surface of Job's abundance, beneath the feasting, the laughter, the harmony of his household, there was a quiet tension that never fully left his spirit, because Job understood something most prosperous men refuse to face: that blessings can be as fragile as glass, and that joy, no matter how bright, can be interrupted by unseen fractures in the human heart. So while his children celebrated, Job watched the horizon of their souls. And every morning, before the first light of dawn pierced the sky, before the heat rose from the ground, before servants stirred the household into motion, Job was already awake, standing in the stillness with a seriousness that felt almost priestly, as if he carried not only the weight of his own life, but the spiritual covering of his entire family. In that early silence, when the world was hushed and the air felt thin and holy, he would pray. And then, with steady hands and reverent intention, he would offer burnt offerings. Not one offering for the family as a whole, but offerings for each of his children, one by one, name by name, as though he refused to let any soul in his household go uncarried before God. Because deep within him, a worrisome thought tormented him like a hidden thorn. Perhaps one of my children has sinned. Perhaps in the warmth of celebration, in the ease of laughter, in the private chambers of thought where no one else can see, one of them has quietly drifted, if not in action, then in the unseen place that matters most: the heart. Perhaps, without speaking it aloud, without daring to confess it to anyone, one of them has allowed bitterness, pride, or rebellion to rise like smoke within their spirit. Perhaps, God forbid, they have even cursed God in their inner life, not with their lips, but with the subtle posture of a heart that forgets the giver while enjoying the gift. And Job did not treat that possibility lightly, not because he was paranoid, not because he was trapped in superstition, but because he was spiritually awake, and he knew that sin does not always announce itself with obvious scandal. Sometimes it hides in secret thoughts, in invisible compromises, in silent moments when the soul begins to lean away from God. Job understood that holiness is not only about what a person does in public, but what they allow to grow in private, and he loved his children too much to pretend their hearts were immune. So every day, without fail, he interceded for them with the flame of sacrifice. And the astonishing thing is this: his devotion was not driven by blind fear, but by love. Love for the God he revered, and love for the family he knew was a gift. Job did not offer sacrifices because he believed God was eager to destroy, He offered them because he believed God was holy, and because he understood that true love does not merely celebrate blessings, it protects them with prayer. It was the quiet discipline of a man who refused to take grace for granted. A father standing between his children and the unseen dangers of the soul.
A worshiper who understood that prosperity is not proof of permanence, and that the greatest battles are sometimes fought long before disaster arrives, on mornings when everyone else is sleeping, and only God hears the trembling prayers of a righteous man. But even as Job prayed, someone else was watching. Not from earth, from heaven. And soon, the world Job thought was secure would begin to crack. While Job stood in the dim light of dawn, offering sacrifice, while flames rose from the altar and prayers rose from his lips like incense, another scene was unfolding far beyond the reach of human eyes, in a realm where time does not move the way it moves on earth, and where every decision carries the weight of eternity. The heavens opened into an eternal court, not a court made of stone and politics, but a court of presence and authority, where the atmosphere itself feels charged with holiness, where the distance between glory and judgment is razor thin, and where created beings stand not to debate, but to present themselves before the one whose will holds the universe together. The sons of God, entities of light and power, servants of the divine order, came forward and stood before the throne, as if the unseen world itself was assembling for something momentous, something written long ago into the deep structure of spiritual reality. And among them, a shadow moved, not radiant, not singing, not carrying worship like the others. A figure walked with unwavering steps, calm, persistent, relentless, like a dark thought that refuses to leave the mind. He was not a messenger bringing hope. He was not a warrior carrying victory. He was the adversary, the wanderer, the accuser, the one who never rests because his very nature is accusation, suspicion, and spiritual demolition. Scripture calls him Satan, and he arrived as one who had traveled far, as one who had seen too much, as one who had made it his mission to search the earth for cracks in the human soul. And then the Lord spoke, not with uncertainty, not with curiosity like a man seeking information, with a voice that thundered with indescribable power, the kind of power that does not need to raise itself to be felt, because everything in heaven already knows who is speaking. "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered, not trembling, not surprised, but with the cold steadiness of one who believes he has earned the right to stand there. "From roaming the earth," he said, "and walking upon it." And the words carried a terrible implication, because they were true. He had wandered through the corridors of human history like a silent observer of collapse, watching kings rise and fall, watching cities bloom and turn to ash, watching hearts bend under pressure, watching men trade integrity for a handful of gold, watching the righteous grow weary and the wicked grow bold. He had seen what humans often hide even from themselves, the way pride quietly grows, the way faith can thin, the way devotion can be strangled by comfort or crushed by pain. He had searched the earth like a hunter searching for weakness, and yet, among all the shifting loyalties and crumbling virtues he had witnessed, there was one life that had remained strangely unbroken. One man in the land of Uz, praying before dawn, offering sacrifices with trembling love. One man whose righteousness refused to bend. And heaven, now gathered in solemn order, was about to speak his name aloud. Because what was happening in this court was not distant from Job's life. It was the hidden beginning of the storm. And once the accuser had been heard, the test would soon descend to earth. And then,
In that eternal court where nothing is spoken carelessly, the Lord turned the conversation toward a single human life. One man on earth whose faith had risen like a pure flame through the darkness of a fallen world. The Lord spoke of him with a certainty that carried both honor and warning, as if heaven itself was testifying to the integrity of a soul. "Have you considered my servant Job?" the Lord said, words that landed like a seal on his name. "There is no one like him on earth, blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." It was not flattery. It was divine recognition. In a world where righteousness is often diluted by hidden motives, Job's life stood clean before God. Not perfect in human pride, but genuine in devotion. And the Lord, who sees beyond appearances, spoke of Job as a living answer to the accuser's constant claim that humanity cannot truly love God without selfish gain. But Satan did not bow to that testimony. He stepped forward with the cold logic of an enemy who has studied human weakness for centuries, and his voice carried the tone of one who believes he has found the formula that explains all devotion. "Does Job fear God for nothing?" Satan retorted, as if righteousness itself were nothing more than a transaction. "Have you not put a hedge around him, around his house, his family, his wealth? You've protected him. You've blessed him in every way. Everything he touches prospers, his sheep, his camels, his servants. And you're surprised he remains faithful?" The accusation was sharper than a blade, because it attacked the very purity of love. It suggested that Job's worship was not worship at all, but strategy, faith bought by comfort, devotion purchased by prosperity. In Satan's eyes, Job was not a man of integrity. He was simply a man with a full table, sheltered by divine favor, praising God because life had been gentle. And then Satan set the challenge like a trap laid in the open. "Stretch out your hand," he said, "and take away everything he has. Destroy his wealth, snatch away his children. Let him taste the dust of ruin, and you will see how he curses you to your face." The air in that heavenly court seemed to tighten, as though the unseen realm itself recognized the seriousness of what had just been spoken. This was not a casual accusation. It was a direct assault on the possibility of genuine faith, on whether a human being can love God for God, even when every visible blessing is stripped away. And the Lord responded, not with panic, not with uncertainty, but with a firm decree that carried both permission and boundary. "Everything he has is in your hands," the Lord declared. "Only do not harm him." A single sentence, a terrifying allowance, a sacred limit. In that moment, the test was set, not because God needed information, but because the story of Job would become a revelation to the world. A battlefield where the question of faith would be answered, not in theory, but in blood and loss and silence. An invisible whisper moved through the heavenly assembly, because everyone understood what this meant. The adversary had been granted permission. And without delay, Satan turned and vanished, descending toward the earth with the speed of fury. Job did not hear the conversation. He did not see the court. He did not know that his name had just been placed at the center of a cosmic confrontation. But his fate was now sealed, and the storm was already moving. The next day began like any other day in Job's world, so calm, so ordinary, so filled with a quiet order of blessing that no one would have imagined it could become the blackest day of his life. The fields were alive with work. Oxen plowed the soil in steady lines, cutting through earth that had always yielded to Job's hands as if it recognized favor. Donkeys grazed peacefully, heads lowered, unafraid. Servants moved through the land with practiced rhythm, tending herds, counting livestock,
carrying out tasks that had become routine under prosperity. And in the house there was laughter. Job's children were gathered for a feast, bread broken, wine poured, voices rising in celebration the way they had so many times before. It looked like safety. It sounded like joy.
It felt like life was still protected by an invisible hedge. For a moment, the world appeared sealed in peace. And then the peace shattered. Without warning, a servant burst into Job's presence, breathless, trembling, terror carved into his face as if he had outrun death itself. His voice shook as he forced the words into the air. "Master, the Sabians attacked. They took your oxen and donkeys. They killed the servants with the sword. I alone escaped to bring you the news." The sentence fell like a stone into Job's chest, heavy and cold. But before his mind could even form a response, before his heart could fully absorb the first blow, the door was already opening again. Another man ran in, panting, eyes wild, as if the sky itself had turned against them. "Master, fire fell from the sky, a storm of flames. Your sheep and your shepherds have been consumed. Nothing remains. Only I escaped to tell you." Fire from the sky. Not theft, not raiders. Something higher. Something terrifyingly sudden, like judgment, like a sign, like heaven itself had become hostile. Job could barely breathe. His thoughts stumbled over the words, trying to understand what kind of world he had woken into. But the storm was not finished. A third messenger stumbled forward, desperation written across his face like a curse. "Sir, the Chaldeans came in 3 bands. They raided your camels. They stole them. They slaughtered your servants with the sword. Only I escaped to tell you." Now it was not one loss. It was everything. His herds, his wealth, his legacy, the labor of years, collapsing in minutes as if an unseen hand was stripping his life down to nothing. Job felt the ground tilt beneath him, as though the earth itself could no longer hold what was happening. And then, the 4th messenger entered. But this one did not rush with frantic words. He moved differently, slower, heavier, like someone carrying a truth too unbearable to speak. His face said what his mouth did not want to say. His eyes carried the shape of grief. "Sir, your children." Job's hands tightened. His heart began to pound with terrifying force, as if it sensed the coming blow before it landed. "Your children were in the eldest son's house, eating and drinking." Then a great wind came from the desert. It struck the house from all 4 corners. The house collapsed, and they all died. Only I escaped to bring you the news. And in that moment, the world stopped. Not because time literally ceased, but because Job's soul hit a silence so deep, it felt like falling beneath the surface of life. 10 voices gone. 10 lives extinguished. In a single breath, the feast became a funeral. The laughter became dust. The house that held celebration became a tomb. 4 messages, 4 blows. And with the last one, Job did not just lose possessions. He lost his future. He lost his name carried forward by children. He lost the treasure he loved most. And the storm had done it all without giving him even a moment to stand. When the 4th messenger finished speaking, Job did not simply receive bad news. He received a collapse so complete that it felt as though the world had been ripped out from under his feet and replaced with a void. Because there are losses you can count and recover from, and then there are losses that erase the language of after. And 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, being taken in one violent breath of desert wind, belongs to that second, merciless category. For a moment, everything around him seemed unreal. The walls of his house, the air in his lungs, the light on the ground. Because grief of this magnitude does not arrive like a visitor. It arrives like an occupying army, pressing down on the chest, strangling the mind, silencing the future, and forcing the soul to stare into a darkness it never imagined it would have to survive. And yet, Job did not lash out into blasphemy, did not throw his faith into the fire of rage, did not turn his suffering into a weapon against the God he had worshipped in quiet mornings. Instead, he rose, slowly, unsteadily, as though his own body was trying to carry a heart too heavy to lift. And he began to mourn in the ancient way, the way a human being confesses with his body what words cannot hold. He tore his robe, not as a performance, but as a declaration that something inside him had been torn beyond repair. And then he shaved his head, letting the strands fall to the earth like scattered remnants of a life that had just been stripped down to bare dust. It was grief. It was surrender. It was the brutal acknowledgement that no amount of righteousness, no amount of discipline, no amount of careful living can bargain with tragedy once it has been permitted to enter. Then he fell to the ground, not into comfort, not into explanation, but into the dirt itself, face pressed downward, hands empty, posture crushed. Because when everything you love has been reduced to ashes, the earth becomes the only honest place to kneel. And there, in the very place where despair would normally turn into rebellion, Job did something that made heaven listen and hell recoil. He worshipped. With a voice that sounded like it had been broken open by sorrow, he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return." He was not reciting philosophy. He was confessing reality. That every possession, every breath, every relationship, every joy, yes, even family, was never owned by right, but entrusted by grace. And then he spoke the line that shattered Satan's accusation at its root, the line that revealed what faith truly is when it has nothing left to hold. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This was not denial. This was not numbness. This was devotion standing in the ruins, refusing to make God valuable only when God is generous. It was the kind of faith Jesus later described in Matthew 7, the house built on rock instead of sand, because the storm does not test the beauty of a house, it tests its foundation. And Job's foundation was not the gifts in his hands, but the God he trusted with his life. And in that moment, when everything else fell, his worship proved something eternal. True faith is not anchored to what God gives. True faith is anchored to who God is. Days passed, and on earth, the ashes of Job's losses still sat where they had fallen, silent evidence that prosperity can vanish in a breath. Yet in the unseen realm, the story did not end with rubble and mourning. Because what happened to Job was never merely human tragedy. It was the visible surface of an invisible contest, a question being tested at the highest level of spiritual reality. Can a man love God for God, even when God's gifts are gone? And so the heavens opened again, not like a gentle curtain, but like a cosmic courtroom revealing itself for a second time. A place where the air feels heavy with authority, and where every word carries the weight of eternity. Once more, the sons of God presented themselves before the throne, beings of light and power standing in ordered reverence. And once more, among them, came the accuser. Satan arrived with the same restless confidence, the same cold persistence of one who refuses to accept defeat, as though the first blow had only sharpened his appetite. The Lord's voice thundered across that court again, not because God lacked knowledge, but because the truth was being set in the open where it could not be twisted. "Where have you come from?" And Satan answered as before, "From roaming the earth,
from walking upon it, as if he were proud of the darkness he had witnessed, as if wandering through human weakness was his native land. But then the Lord spoke of Job again, this time with a tone that cut deeper than triumph, because it carried the sound of a righteous man standing in ruins and still refusing to turn his worship into accusation.
"Have you considered my servant Job?" the Lord declared. And the words were not merely praise, they were a verdict. "There is no one like him on the earth, blameless and upright, one who fears God and shuns evil. And still, he maintains his integrity, even though you incited ruin against him without cause." The accuser was exposed. The first assault had failed. Job had lost wealth. He had lost children. He had lost the entire visible framework of blessing. And yet he had not cursed God. He had not broken. And for Satan, that was not merely a setback. It was humiliation, because his claim that faith is only purchased by comfort had just been shattered by a grieving man worshiping in dust. But Satan did not retreat. He stepped forward with eyes blazing, not with sorrow, but with calculation, and he spoke the ancient bargain of survival, the dark logic that assumes every soul has a breaking point. "Skin for skin," he said, words sharp as iron. "A man will give everything he has to save his own life. Stretch out your hand now, touch his flesh and bone, strike his body, and you will see him curse you to your face." It was the second level of the test, more brutal than the first, because Satan was no longer attacking what Job owned. He was attacking what Job was. Wealth can be mourned. Even family can be grieved. But the body is the place where pain becomes personal, where suffering enters the nerves and refuses to let the mind rest, where faith is forced to endure not only loss, but relentless physical torment. And the heavenly court fell silent, as if even the angels understood the gravity of what had been demanded. Then the Lord answered, steady, sovereign, and terrifyingly precise, granting permission again, but setting a boundary that would not be crossed. "He is in your hands," God said, "but spare his life." A line was drawn in the invisible world. A door was opened, and Satan descended once more, not to steal flocks, not to collapse houses, not to empty barns, because there was nothing left to take in that way. Now he was going to strike the one thing Job still carried, his own flesh. And when the adversary returned to the earth, he did not come like a thief in the night, stealing livestock or burning fields from a distance, because the first assault had already stripped Job's world down to bare ground. This time the strike was closer, more intimate, more merciless. An attack not on property, but on the body itself, the fragile vessel that carries a human soul through time. In a single movement of permission turned into pain, Job was afflicted with a terrible disease, and what had once been a body marked by strength and blessing became a landscape of suffering so relentless it felt as though his flesh had been turned into a living prison. From the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, sores erupted, open, festering, raw, like wounds that refused to close, as if his skin itself had become a battlefield. The pain did not visit him in waves, it surrounded him. It wrapped around him like a shroud of agony, pressing on every nerve, choking sleep, poisoning rest, turning each breath into labor. His skin, once whole, began to crack and peel. Fever burned through him like hidden fire. The itching was not a mild irritation. It was torment that clawed at his mind, demanding relief and offering none. He could not walk without his body protesting. He could not lie down without pain screaming through his limbs. He could not close his eyes without waking again, because even his dreams could not escape the suffering that had claimed him. And so Job was driven to the ashes. The man who had once sat among feasts and laughter now sat among dust and ruin, as if his life had been dragged back to the very ground from which humanity was formed. He lowered himself into the ash heap, broken, forgotten, disfigured, and there he found a piece of broken pottery, a jagged shard sharp enough to scrape, and with it he began to scrape his own skin. Not as an act of madness, but as the desperate behavior of a man trying to survive in a body that had become unbearable. Each stroke was excruciating, each moment lasted too long, and the silence around him was almost worse than the pain, because suffering isolates not only the body, but the soul. Days passed, and the transformation became complete. The name Job had once carried honor. People had once spoken it with respect, as they would speak of stability, wisdom, blessing. But now his honor vanished like smoke. The greatest man in the East became something the world could not look at for long without discomfort. A warning, a mystery, a spectacle, a reminder that prosperity is fragile and that suffering can erase status in an instant. Those who once benefited from his generosity kept their distance. Those who once praised him found excuses to disappear. Friends grew silent. Neighbors turned away. The same world that had admired him now abandoned him, because many people can celebrate the blessed, but fewer can sit beside the broken. And Job, once surrounded by servants, wealth, and family, became a human wreck, reduced to aching flesh and unanswered questions, sitting alone in ashes as if the earth itself had swallowed his former life. Yet even there, in the dust, the real test was tightening. Because Satan had not only attacked his body, he was preparing to attack his heart. In the ash heap where Job sat, skin torn, eyes hollowed by sleepless torment, breath shallow beneath the weight of relentless pain, there was still one person who remained close enough to witness what no stranger could bear to watch: his wife. Not a distant observer, not a voice from rumor, but the woman who had lived inside the same house of blessing, who had held the same children, who had watched the same feasts fill the rooms with laughter, until the laughter turned into funerals and the house became a memory stained with grief. She had endured the first collapse. She had watched wealth vanish like smoke, livestock stolen or consumed, servants slaughtered, the entire legacy of their home reduced to ruins in a single day. And then she had endured the second collapse, the one that breaks people in a quieter way, standing over the graves of 10 children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, trying to understand how a mother is supposed to keep breathing when her world has been buried. And now she was enduring the third collapse, seeing her husband, once strong, once honored, once upright in the eyes of all, reduced to a living wound, scraping his flesh with broken pottery while sitting in ashes like a man already half in the grave. This was not merely suffering. This was devastation layered upon devastation, pressed into one human life until the soul begins to crack. And her soul cracked. Because grief does not always speak with tenderness. Sometimes it speaks with rage. Sometimes it speaks with exhaustion. Sometimes it speaks with the desperate logic of a heart that can no longer carry the weight of unanswered pain. She approached Job with tears that had nowhere left to go, with a voice trembling not only from sadness, but from the collapse of hope itself. And she released the sentence that Satan could not force Job to say, so he tried to place it on the tongue of the one closest to him. "Do you still hold on to your integrity?" she said, as if the word integrity had become cruel in a world that no longer seemed just. And then, like a final blow meant to end the fight, she whispered what sounded like surrender dressed as defiance. "Curse God and die." It was not the speech of a villain. It was the cry of someone shattered beyond language. The kind of sentence that rises from a heart that has been emptied so completely it no longer knows how to pray.
The kind of sentence that tries to end the pain by ending everything. In that moment, she was not only speaking to Job, she was speaking to the silence, to the graves, to the ruin, to the God she could no longer understand. And Job closed his eyes because he knew she was broken too. He knew her words were not born from cold rebellion, but from grief that had reached its limit, grief that had become unbearable weight. Yet even with his body bleeding, even with his life stripped down to ash, his faith did not flinch. It did not tilt. It did not surrender to blasphemy. He opened his eyes and looked at her, suffering etched into his face, but conviction still burning beneath it. And he answered with the steadiness of a man clinging to something deeper than relief. "You speak like a foolish woman," he said, not to humiliate her, but to name the trap hidden inside her despair. "Shall we accept only the good from God and not the bad?" And there it was, the core of the test. Not whether Job loved God when the table was full, but whether Job would still trust God when the table was gone, when the children were gone, when the health was gone, when the sky felt silent and the only thing left was pain and breath and faith. Because this is where real faith is revealed, when there is nothing left to cling to but God Himself. Not His gifts, not His comforts, not His explanations, only Him. And Job, sitting in ashes, proved that even stripped to nothing, he would not let go. Word of Job's downfall did not remain hidden for long, because suffering, especially suffering this shocking, moves through a region like fire through dry grass, carried by whispers, carried by travelers, carried by the fearful question on every tongue: how could this happen to the most righteous man in the East? And eventually, that news reached 3 men who had once known Job, not as a broken figure in ashes, but as a pillar, respected, wise, steady, someone whose counsel strengthened others, someone whose life looked like proof that faith could flourish under God's favor. Their names were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, longtime friends, counselors, men who believed they understood God's justice, and who could not bear the thought of Job suffering alone. So they dropped what they were doing, set out together, and traveled toward him with a shared intention: to comfort him, to mourn with him, to make sense of what had happened. Because surely, they thought, if anyone could explain this, it would be those who had walked beside him. But nothing prepared them for what they saw. From a distance, they spotted a figure among the dust and ash, seated low to the ground, motionless, surrounded by ruins like a man swallowed by his own tragedy. His body was covered in sores, his skin was torn and disfigured. His posture carried a heaviness that did not look like tiredness. It looked like defeat. And as they drew nearer, their steps slowed, not from caution, but from disbelief. Because the closer they got, the less they could recognize him. It couldn't be Job, not the Job they knew, not the respected man of abundance, the upright worshiper, the one whose home once echoed with feasts and laughter. This figure looked like a stranger wearing Job's suffering, like a shadow wearing the remnants of a former life. And then their hearts broke, not politely, not quietly. The grief hit them like a wave, and they raised their voices and wept aloud, the sound of it raw and public. The kind of mourning that makes passers-by stop and listen, because it carries the unmistakable weight of something sacred being shattered. They tore their garments, a violent, helpless act, as if ripping cloth could somehow express the ripping of reality. And then, with trembling hands, they took dust from the ground and threw it over their heads, letting the earth cover them as if to say, "If he sits in ashes, then we will wear ashes too. If his life has been buried, then let us taste burial with him." But when they finally reached him, there were no words. Because what do you say to a man who has lost everything in a day and then lost his health in the days that followed?
What sentence can carry enough weight to stand beside that kind of pain without insulting it? What comfort can be offered without sounding like emptiness? So they did something rare. They sat down with him. And for 7 days and 7 nights they spoke nothing, not because they lacked thoughts, but because sorrow this deep is not something you fix with speeches. It is not a problem you solve with clever theology. It is an abyss you sit beside. Their silence became their only honest gift. Because sometimes the deepest compassion is not advice, not explanations, not answers, but presence. The deepest sorrow cannot be comforted with words. Sometimes all you can do is remain. And for 7 days and 7 nights, they remained. But silence, like a fragile wall, can only hold back so much, and soon it would break. Because when Job finally spoke, his words would reveal a new kind of battle, not against raiders or disease, but against the crushing mystery of suffering itself. For 7 days and 7 nights, Job sat among ashes, like a man pinned beneath the ruins of his own life. And his friends sat with him in a silence so thick it felt almost sacred. Because there are moments when language becomes too small, when every attempt to explain only cheapens the pain, when even comfort sounds like noise. The wind came and went, the sun rose and fell, the nights stretched long and cold, and still no one spoke, as if they were all waiting for something, an answer, a sign, a miracle, a voice from heaven that would finally break the unbearable stillness. But heaven remained silent, and on the 8th day the silence broke from the earth. Job opened his mouth, not to curse God, not to accuse his friends, not to unravel the invisible conversation that had taken place in the heavenly court, because he did not know it existed. He cursed something else. He cursed the day he was born. It was the cry of a soul so crushed that it could not find a doorway out of suffering, the lament of a man whose pain had climbed beyond the limits of endurance, and whose mind could no longer see purpose through the fog of agony. His voice did not rise like a sermon. It rose like a funeral hymn sung over his own existence. "May the day of my birth perish," he breathed, as if he wanted time itself to erase the moment he entered the world. "Let the night that said, 'A boy is conceived,' be turned into darkness." He was not asking for comfort anymore. He was not requesting restoration. He was not negotiating for relief. He wanted something more absolute, to be undone, to be erased, to vanish from history as if he had never been. And his friends listened in horror, because they had never heard Job speak like this. Not the wise counselor who lifted the weak, not the righteous man whose mornings were filled with prayer, but a broken sufferer whose words were now stained with the color of despair. "Why did I not perish in the womb?" Job asked. And the question did not sound like philosophy. It sounded like someone drowning, reaching for air and finding none. "Why did I not die as I came from the belly?" He imagined peace not as joy, but as absence, an end to breathing, an end to feeling, an end to the torture of waking in a body that no longer felt like a gift. If he had died before being born, he thought, he would be at rest now, lying still where kings and counselors lie, where prisoners are free from their masters, where the weary finally sleep. Then came the question that pierced even deeper, because it exposed the mystery at the heart of human suffering. "Why is light given to those in misery?" he cried. "Why is life given to the bitter in soul, to those who long for death, but it does not come?" Job's lament was not rebellion against God. It was the confession of a man who could not understand why he was still alive when life had become unbearable. He was exhausted beyond measure. He could not eat. He could not sleep. He could not find even a thin thread of meaning to hold. His chest heaved with each sob, and yet death did not arrive to end it. God did not grant him release. The pain continued, day after day, without explanation and without pause. And still, Job lived. Not because he wanted to, but because life, even in suffering, held him there, breathing in the ashes, trapped between the longing to disappear and the strange, relentless fact that he was still under God's hand, even when God felt silent. This was not the end of Job's faith. It was the moment his faith was forced to walk through darkness without sight.
Because sometimes the deepest test is not whether you worship when blessed. It is whether you keep breathing when nothing makes sense. After Job's lament poured out like a river of grief, after he cursed the day of his birth and questioned why light is given to the miserable, the air around the ash heap grew heavy again, not with silence this time, but with the uneasy tension of men who feel they must respond. Because Job's words were not small, they were dangerous. They sounded like despair standing at the edge of blasphemy, like faith trembling so violently it might fracture. And Eliphaz, the eldest among them, could not bear to let those words hang without challenge, as though the integrity Job had once carried was now slipping into darkness before their eyes. So Eliphaz drew a breath, slow and deliberate, and spoke. Not gently, not with the softness of a mourner who simply wants to comfort, but with the firm tone of a counselor who believes he understands how God's world works and who cannot accept that suffering might be meaningless. Think about who you used to be, Eliphaz began, and his words reached backward into Job's former life like fingers pressing on an old wound. You instructed many. You strengthened the weak. When people stumbled, you steadied them. When others fell, you lifted them with your words. When hearts collapsed, you supported them with encouragement. Eliphaz was not wrong. Job had been a pillar, a man whose presence brought stability, whose counsel carried weight, whose integrity gave others courage. He reminded Job of that deliberately, as if to say, "You were the one who taught others how to stand, so why are you collapsing now?" And then Eliphaz turned the knife slightly. "But now," he said, letting the contrast hang like judgment in the air, "now that calamity has come upon you, you are discouraged. Now that it touches you, you crumble." The implication was sharp. Your faith sounded solid when you were advising others, but can it survive when the storm sits on your own chest? He pressed further, probing for a flaw in Job's foundation. Is not your fear of God your confidence? Is not the integrity of your life your hope? It sounded like reassurance, but underneath it was suspicion. Because Eliphaz had already chosen a framework where suffering must have a cause that fits the rules he trusts. Then he spoke the principle that would shape everything that followed. "Reflect," Eliphaz said. "Has an innocent man ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed?" There it was, the theology of cause and effect, the belief that God's justice operates like an immediate equation. Righteousness brings blessing, wickedness brings ruin. And if Job was now ruined, Eliphaz reasoned, then something must be wrong beneath the surface. Not necessarily visible to others, not necessarily admitted by Job, but present, hidden, real. He continued with imagery that felt like a verdict, that those who plow evil reap trouble, that the wicked perish by the breath of God, that destruction is not random like grass springing from the ground, but purposeful, directed, a consequence. And then, as if offering Job an exit, Eliphaz shifted into what he believed was mercy wrapped in counsel. "If I were you," he said, "I would seek God. I would commit my cause to Him." He spoke of God's greatness, His unfathomable deeds, His countless wonders,
his power to frustrate the cunning and humble the proud. Then came the conclusion that landed like a hard stone. Suffering may be correction. And finally, Eliphaz delivered the line that sounded like comfort, but carried the weight of discipline. "Blessed is the man whom God corrects," he said. "Do not despise the discipline of the Almighty, for he wounds, but he also binds up. He injures, but his hands also heal." It was a clear message. Job, accept this as God's correction, and you will find restoration. But Job's pain was not a simple equation, and Eliphaz's logic, however confident, was about to collide with a mystery too deep for human arguments to hold. Eliphaz finished speaking as though he had delivered a necessary medicine, bitter but healing. And for a moment the ash heap fell quiet again, not with peace, but with the tense stillness of a wound being pressed. Job sat motionless, his body aching, his eyes sunken, his skin marked by suffering that no theology could scrape away. And the silence that followed was not relief. It was the sound of grief being misunderstood. Then Bildad spoke. His voice carried the tone of someone who believed the matter was simple, almost mechanical, as though divine justice could be reduced to a clean formula that always produces the same result. He looked at Job with stern certainty, and in that certainty was a cruelty he may not have intended, but could not avoid, because his words reached backward into the most unspeakable place of Job's pain, the graves of his children. "How long will you speak these empty words?" Bildad demanded, as if Job's lament were nothing but wind. "Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty twist what is right?" And then he said what no mourning father should have to hear spoken aloud, that if Job's children had died, it must have been because they sinned, not because the world is broken, not because tragedy can strike the innocent, not because mysteries exist beyond human sight, but because, in Bildad's worldview, death like that could only be a punishment. And then he offered Job his solution, as though restoration were a lever Job could pull if he would just accept the accusation. "If you will seek God," Bildad insisted, "if you will plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, then surely he will rouse himself for you and restore your rightful place." He appealed to tradition, to the wisdom of ancient generations, as if the past had already sealed the verdict. God does not reject the blameless. Those who sow evil reap trouble. His conclusion tightened like a rope. If your suffering continues, then you must not be as upright as you claim. Job's friends were not merely comforting him now, they were prosecuting him. And then Zophar stepped forward, harsher still, less patient, more brutal, because to him there was no mystery here worth discussing, no space for lament, no sacred permission to grieve without being accused. "Will your endless talk go unanswered?" Zophar sneered, his eyes sharp with moral impatience. "Will you keep insisting you are innocent?" He treated Job's words like arrogance, like a man trying to out-argue God, and with a kind of bitter confidence, he implied that Job deserved even worse, that if God spoke, Job would be exposed, that Job's suffering was proof enough of guilt. And again, the same command returned, colder each time. Repent, admit it, accept your punishment, then you may be restored. But Job could not absorb any more, not because he lacked faith, but because he could no longer bear being wounded by the very people who came to heal. Something rose inside him, anguish turning into fire, grief sharpening into defiance. And when he answered, his words did not drift. They struck. "If my misery could be weighed," Job said, voice trembling with a pain too heavy to describe, "if my calamity could be placed on a scale, you would see it is heavier than the sand of the sea,
That is why my words have been hasty." He looked at them with eyes that had stared into darkness too long. "You think you have wisdom," he said, "but you have betrayed me."
A suffering man expects loyalty from his friends, and instead you step back as if I am a threat. Then Job's longing broke open into the terrifying honesty of a wounded soul. He wanted release. He wanted the struggle to end. He wanted God to crush him if it meant the torment would stop. Yet even in that despair, he would not confess to sins he had not committed, and he would not accept their neat equations as truth. Because Job's suffering made no sense to human logic, and so his desire shifted, away from arguing with men, toward confronting God. If he could not find justice among companions, he would seek it from the Almighty himself. And there, in the heart of his ruin, he spoke the line that stands like a pillar in the storm, an oath carved from agony and faith fused together. "Even if he slays me, yet will I trust in him." Not because Job understood, but because Job refused to let suffering rewrite who God is. And that refusal, more than any argument, was the real battlefield. Job had demanded an audience with the Almighty. He had reached toward heaven with wounded hands and begged for an answer, an explanation, a reason, a single beam of clarity in the crushing fog of suffering. And for a long time, there was nothing but silence. No voice, no sign, no soft reassurance descending from the sky. Only the ash heap, only pain, only breath. Until the wind began to move. At first it was gentle, almost unnoticeable, just a faint stirring through the dust, as if the earth itself was inhaling. But then the air thickened, the breeze tightened into a force, the horizon darkened, and in moments, the wind became a whirlwind, a storm rising with a deliberate intensity, as though creation had been summoned into attention. Dust lifted in spirals. The ash around Job swirled like a living veil. The sky seemed to close like a door. And then, God spoke. Not from the calm, not from the comfort Job had imagined, but from the storm itself. A voice thundered through the whirlwind, not like human speech, but like command, layered with eternity, shaking the air as if the world was too small to hold it. "Who is this that darkens my counsel with words without knowledge?" It was the first strike, sharp, exposing, forcing Job to realize that his questions, however honest, had been spoken from a place of limited sight. And then the voice pressed further, not allowing Job to hide behind grief or pain. "Gird yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." Job, who had begged to debate God, now stood before God, yet not as an equal, not as a challenger, but as a creature confronted by the Creator. And God did not begin by explaining the heavenly court, or Satan's accusation, or the hidden purpose behind Job's trial. He did something far more overwhelming. He revealed himself. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?" God asked, each question landing like thunder. "Tell me if you understand. Who determined its measurements? Who stretched the measuring line across it?" The words rolled forward, relentless like waves that cannot be stopped. God spoke of the sea bursting from the womb of creation, of doors and boundaries placed where chaos could not pass. He spoke of the morning being commanded, of dawn being shown its place, as if even sunrise is not random, but obedient. Job could hardly breathe, because God was not offering him a reason. He was offering him perspective, a vastness so immense that it made Job's suffering feel like a single thread in a tapestry too large for human eyes to grasp. The message was not, "Your pain is small,"
It was, "Your vision is small." And then God spoke of creatures that embodied untamable power. Behemoth, made with strength like iron, impossible to control. And Leviathan, the terrifying sea monster of ancient imagery, untouchable, unconquerable, with a presence that mocked human dominance.
If no man could master what God had made, then who could stand above God and demand explanations as if the universe owed him an account? The whirlwind did not soothe Job, it shattered him. Not by cruelty, but by glory. And in that moment, something inside Job broke open. Not faith collapsing, but pride dissolving. The desperate need to control the narrative melting under the weight of divine majesty. He fell into the dust again, but this time not as a man crushed by tragedy, as a man awakened. "I know that you can do all things," Job confessed, voice trembling. "No purpose of yours can be thwarted." And then, with words that marked the turning point of his entire journey, he said what every sufferer longs to say. Not because the pain is explained, but because God is revealed. "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see you." God did not give Job answers. He gave Job himself. And somehow, that was enough. When the whirlwind quieted and the voice of God ceased, the ash heap was no longer merely a place of ruin. It had become holy ground, because Job had not been given a neat explanation, not a timeline of why, not a list of hidden reasons that would make suffering feel reasonable. He had been given something far greater and far more dangerous to the pride of man, the presence of God Himself. A revelation so weighty that it reordered everything Job thought he knew about justice, blessing, and the limits of human understanding. And then the Lord turned His gaze, not toward Job, but toward the three friends who had spoken so confidently, so sharply, so certain that they represented God's mind. In that moment, the courtroom shifted. The men who came as counselors became the ones under judgment. God's voice carried fire, not because He despised them, but because they had used His name to wound a suffering man. "My anger burns against you," the Lord declared, "because you have not spoken what is right about me, as my servant Job has." It was a stunning reversal. Job, the one in ashes, the one accused, the one treated like a hidden sinner, was vindicated by God. And the friends, so sure of their logic, were exposed as men who confused theology with truth, who mistook certainty for wisdom, and who tried to force a mystery into a formula. Their words had sounded righteous, but they had not reflected God's heart. So God commanded them to bring offerings, sacrifices to acknowledge their wrong. And then came the most humbling instruction of all. Job would pray for them, and God would accept Job's prayer. The man they had scorned would become their intercessor. The wounded one would become their covering. And Job did it. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, not with the cold satisfaction of being proven right. He prayed for the very men who had pierced him with accusation when he was already bleeding. In that act, Job's faith revealed its deepest strength. Not only endurance, but mercy. And then, the restoration came. Not as a reward Job could claim, but as a gift only God could give. The Lord restored Job's life and gave him double what he had lost. Double the abundance, double the provision. A renewed household, renewed honor, renewed days. Those who had withdrawn returned to comfort him, to bring gifts, to stand near him again, as if the world itself was being rebuilt around the man it had once abandoned. But the most beautiful restoration was not counted in livestock. It was counted in laughter. God blessed Job again with 7 sons and 3 daughters, and Scripture lingers over the daughters as a sign of beauty after devastation. Jemima, whose name speaks of radiant daybreak after a long night. Keziah, fragrant like spices, a picture of purity and delight. And Karen Hapuch, evoking honor and splendor, as if God was painting light back onto a life once covered in ash. Job lived on 140 more years, long enough to see children, grandchildren, even great-grandchildren. And in the end, he died old and full of days, not frantic, not haunted, but at peace. And here is the final lesson that shakes the soul. Job never received the reason he demanded. God never explained the heavenly conversation. He never justified the trial with a simple answer. Job did not receive a formula. He received God. "I had heard of you," Job confessed, "but now my eyes see you." And that became the true reward. So now the question turns to us, quietly, personally, like a mirror held to the heart. Will you trust God even when you don't understand? Drop your answer in the comments and share your own faith story, because someone reading it might be standing in their own ashes today. If this message strengthened you, hit like, share this video with someone who needs hope, and subscribe for more Bible stories that go deeper than the surface. Blessings to you and your family. Amen.